were fed to animals that were then used to generate food. So I first want to just back up and define what I mean by sewage sludge. Sewage sludge is a term that refers to the solid material that floats to the top of sewer water. And it is comprised of a lot of human waste, but it also contains basically everything else that is in the sewer. And that literally can be hundreds, and in some instances, thousands of different contaminants or toxins. So examples can be heavy metals like the lead from people's pipes. It can be viruses. It can be the toxins or poisons in cleaning products. Essentially anything that we might flush down a drain, whether that's in a kitchen or a bathroom, right, will wind up in our sewers. And so there's really no way to separate all those toxins from that solid material. Sewage is generally processed in sewage treatment plants, but most of those contaminants will still remain afterwards. And it is thoroughly legal in the United States and has been for more than 2 decades to take that substances, meaning treated sewage, and to spread it over a field of crops and to use it essentially as fertilizer. And it works as fertilizer for the same reasons that, for instance, animal manure fertilizer does. There are nutrients in waste products that can essentially enrich the soil and help plants to grow. But when you're using sewage sludge as a fertilizer, as you might imagine, all of those toxins are also going directly into the soil and being absorbed by the food as it grows. And so one of the things that we see is then we can wind up with heavy metals, residue from various kinds of chemicals, poisons, drugs, and antibiotics, you name it, inside the cells of the food. Essentially, fertilizer is food for a crop. And so you want to think about it as if the crop that you're growing is eating that fertilizer. It's eating the sludge, and that means it becomes part of it. So sewage sludge, again, as noted, is legal to use as a fertilizer in the United States. And the only ways in which you could meaningfully ensure that you are not consuming sewage sludge in the food that you eat would be if you either grew the food yourself or formed a direct relationship with a grower and were familiar enough with what they were doing to be confident of what fertilizers or other substances they were using. Or you can buy food that's certified organic. It was a bit of a political battle, but certified organic standards do prohibit the use of sewage sludge in food in the United States. The last thing I want to say about this is part of the reason why sewage sludge is legal is that it's been endorsed by the Environmental Protection Agency, and they often use the term biosolids, which is essentially an industry term referencing sewage sludge and nothing else. They'll use both terms, but if you hear the term biosolids, that's what we're talking about. I want to briefly quote the Center for Food Safety, which describes sewage sludge as follows. They say, quote, "Sewage sludge includes anything that is flushed, poured, or dumped into our nation's wastewater system, a vast toxic stew of waste collected from countless sources, from homes to chemical industries to hospitals. The sludge being spread on our crop fields is a dangerous mix of heavy metals, industrial compounds, viruses, bacteria, drug residues, and radioactive material. Hundreds of people have fallen ill after being exposed to sewage sludge fertilizer, suffering from respiratory distress, headaches, nausea, rashes, reproductive complications, cysts, and tumors." And that ends the quotation. And again, the source on this is the Center for Food Safety. As their statement illustrates, the substantial dangers associated with growing food in sewage sludge are frequently challenged by environmental advocates, but as noted, the practice has been legitimized, regulated, and legalized under the auspices of the Environmental Protection Act and with the cooperation of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. So at present, the practice continues to be legal, and the only reliable way as a consumer to avoid it is to buy certified organic food. Before I close this part of our discussion, want to mention a court case which was tried over 10 years ago in the federal courts in Georgia. The case in question is called McElmurray versus USDA, and it was decided in 2008 by Judge Anthony Alaimo of the 11th Circuit Court. And the case involved farmers who had sewage sludge repeatedly applied to the crop fields in which they were growing feed for their dairy cows. So they were running essentially a dairy farm and growing the food directly for the cows. And the sewage sludge was applied by the municipal government, I believe in Augusta, Georgia. And this went on for about 11 years, so they kept using sewage sludge fertilizer until they recognized a number of adverse effects, including hundreds of their dairy cows dying after eating the food. After Judge Alaimo reviewed all the evidence, one of the things that he said, and I quote, was this: "Senior EPA officials took extraordinary steps to quash scientific dissent and any questioning of EPA's biosolids program, period." So, in addition to the deaths of hundreds of dairy cattle, the case involved contaminated milk supplies which reached several states and contained thallium, which is the primary toxin that we find in rat poison, and which they were able to verify had been present in the sludge spread on the crops which were fed to the cows on the McElmurray farm. So the court essentially found that their land was now too contaminated to be safe for growing any crops, and found in favor of the McElmurrays. Despite this kind of critique from other federal legal authorities, particularly our 11th Circuit Court, the basic standards for using sewage sludge as fertilizer remain the same and remain sanctioned by the Environmental Protection Agency. So again, in essence, if you would like to avoid having sewage sludge as a fertilizer in food that you're eating, the best way to do that, short of growing it yourself or again establishing a direct relationship with growers, is to rely on the certified organic standard, which prohibits the use of sewage sludge in growing crops. The last thing that I just want to acknowledge is a common question that I'm asked when I talk about this subject, which is why use sewage sludge as fertilizer? And it's notable that the laws which enabled this practice came about shortly after Congress prohibited dumping sewage sludge into the ocean. So one of the reasons is just that it became practical for municipalities that were trying to figure out where to put it. And the reason that sewage sludge fertilizer is often purchased by growers is that it's one of the cheapest fertilizers available because there is so much sewage. And so what we see is that millions of tons of sewage sludge are spread back onto cropland in the United States. And this has been a practice again for more than 2 decades in the United States. So I have more to say about the subject of certified organic, and I want to just delve a little bit into fact and fiction. What can we trust and what should we recognize as a myth or at least not a reliable truth? But I'm going to end this part and pick this up in part 2 of Certified Organic, Separating Fact from Fiction. Again, if you're on iTunes, please give us 5 stars and please feel free to connect with us on social media. You can find all of our links through our website, which once again is at repairconnect.org. Thanks so much for listening.